the experience we're going after is you go in, you type in the idea you want to build. Let's say you want a decentralized, freelancer marketplace, or you want a, decentralized video content platform that doesn't, kick off creators from its platform. And it actually starts by writing out how would that platform work, right? In natural language in English. And you can correct it, ask you questions. It's like, hey, should it have this, do you want to pay with token or with stable coins? And you can kind of like really reason through this and kind of work with it almost like as a partner to figure out how you want that platform to be built. And then the developer part kicks in and tries to build it. It writes smart contracts, it writes front end, it does, middleware and other stuff. And you have a fully built application that you can, play with, interact with.
Welcome to the Never Die Podcast, your weekly crypto alpha for those who never quit. Today we have on Illia, co-founder of Near, to talk about all things AI, crypto, and more. Illia used to work on the Google Research AI team and co-authored papers that modern large language AI models are built off of today. He's, needless to say, a really smart guy and has some deep insights into the AI space and the crypto space as well, including being maybe one of the most knowledgeable people on the planet when it comes to how these two spaces might intersect in the future. In this episode, we talk about Near AI. What is it and why it might unlock the next crypto super app, AI presidents, and how we might be headed into a much different world over the next few decades. Near as a whole, and why it's one of the most undervalued blockchains today. Spoiler alert, it is one of the few blockchains today that actually has apps used by millions of users worldwide. Why does nobody talk about it then? We talk about all this and more. Let's dive in. I guess to just start things off, can you introduce yourself and just maybe your background in crypto and your background in the AI space?
For sure, yeah. So I'm Illia, co-founder of Near and Near Protocol. And my background is actually in machine learning and AI. For about 10 years before the crypto world, I was working across kind of applied machine learning, research, and development. And so my kind of most notable work has been while I was at Google Research, and I worked on question answering, machine translation, in general, natural language understanding. And my thesis in general in research has been that natural language is the most direct way for us to actually make progress toward artificial general intelligence. And so I joined to kind of make progress on that. And we had actually very interesting models even back in 2015, 16, but they were too slow. They were hard to train. And so we couldn't put them in production on google.com. And that's kind of at the end, you want to get what you build in front of billion users. And so the team, kind of a very stochastic group formed around this idea that now is known as transformers to really solve the challenge that we had before with kind of deep learning for natural language. And so we published a paper called Attention is All You Need. And this is probably one of the most cited papers right now in AI, especially in the last 10 years. And it's powering ChatGPT, Midjourney, Gemini, and pretty much every single thing that's been built right now in AI space. Kind of that architecture that we came up at Google Research. Now, I left Google because I wanted to actually build a product. And at the time, we kind of made a bet that we will teach machines to code. Back then, it sounded like science fiction, right? It's like, hey, you'll just tell the computer in natural language and it'll write code. Like, really? Now we know this is totally possible. We have ChatGPT, doing that every day for millions of users. But back then, it was completely unthinkable. And we made a bet. We thought that, the space will be evolving. We thought we'll be able to acquire a lot more training data. And so we actually used a very interesting way. We contracted, in a way, students around the world, computer science students in China and Eastern Europe, who would write code for us, write descriptions, so kind of add more training data for us. Now, that's where the challenge lay. those countries have usually some weird capital control or some not very good relationship with US, where sending dollars from your bank account or PayPal or TransferWise didn't work. And somebody suggested like, hey, can you guys send me Bitcoin instead? And so that's kind of how we started diving into Bitcoin and Ethereum and then all the crypto technologies, because we're like, well, this actually would solve our problems. There was like a global payment network where we can tap in, transfer money. It should be super easy, super cheap. Now, even already back then in 2018, it wasn't that cheap, and it was clearly not easy. And so we started diving in, just like, hey, I'm coming from Google. My co-founder built sharded database that's used by Fortune 500 companies. So like we know how scalable systems work. So it was kind of very strange for us, diving into like the systems which are supposed to handle billions of users and billions of dollars, and they're built pretty much to run on a single machine. Even if they it's the same work replicated by all computers. So you have like tons of machines, but they're all doing the same work. And so that's where kind of the history of Near comes, is Near protocol itself, is how do we solve this kind of problem where ideally you should not need to increase fees for users when there's more users. You should not have a limit what one application can do. And we designed Near with a lot of that in mind: scalability, ease of use, ease of development. And launched it at the end of 2020 and have been, seeing pretty nice growth of the ecosystem with 10x actually increase in usage so far every year by number of active users, with over 15 million monthly actives right now.
And those are two very different things. So you have this background in AI, you have this project in crypto, and we'll go into them separately and then kind of tie together maybe how those two worlds are almost merging now. Maybe let's start with AI and just the current state of AI. You mentioned how you thought it was crazy back in the day, like, making this bet, like, will AI be able to code? And now we're at the point that like I can enter a prompt and get an image that looks like it was taken with a real physical camera. Well, now we have videos. Luma just released this crazy release where people are taking a bunch of old memes and turning them into videos, and they look like real videos. It's crazy. And this just is like rapidly accelerating. When I first started creating prompts on Midjourney, they look like blobs. And that was like a year and a half ago. And now it's like we have videos coming out. And it makes me think, where do you see AI going in just like the next 5 years? Like it's accelerating so fast. We're almost like hitting this weird curve of like compounding. Where do you see it maybe ending up in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's kind of obviously speculating here, and everybody has very, very wide range of predictions, right? There's some skeptics who are like, okay, cool, this was an improvement, but, it all kind of now slowed down, and, let's just digest what's already here. And there is also like, I wouldn't say optimists, but more like the opposite of skeptic here, which are like, okay, look, it's been pretty much every 2 years we've seen like a significant improvement, right, in the model capabilities. And so you can imagine, another year and we'll see like a significant improvement from here, which now will add a more advanced reasoning capabilities and ability to, execute actions kind of without getting stuck in the loops, etc. And so independently of where you are on either of the spectrums, what have been with machine learning is that you have this almost like a random process of research making advancements. Like it's really hard to predict what's actually going to work. But it has been indeed making progress very solidly, just because there's so many people looking at it. And the past 2 years, the amount of investment, the amount of attention, the amount of new people and talent coming in, it just kind of, compared to back in 2000, like, I mean, I've been kind of one way or another in machine learning from like 2008, obviously it's incomparable on how much more attention the space is getting now. So I think we definitely will see continuous progress. We'll definitely see really amazing results. I do believe we'll see kind of a pretty transformative change in how we interact with computing, in how we interact with each other, and even how we interact with like communities and governments that got to start transforming. I had made this vision casting talk last year. I called it AI President. And it was the idea that actually the more effective way of governance, right? Like right now, you need to build these massive hierarchies where, like one person can only manage that many people. And so you need this like system of systems to manage, large organizations of people. But actually an AI that is able to maintain context across, a really large number of people and, have a very specific goals of, reducing CO2, increasing GDP, etc., is able to manage everyone directly one-to-one. That you don't need hierarchy of middle managers and, ministries, etc., to do all that. So you can imagine, a lot of the flattening that will happen, both in traditional organizations, like think of it as the ICEO, and in government and kind of other kind of more traditionally state-run organizations with AI President. And I think that will be a very interesting transition because, again, like right now, you have a lot of people whose job is pretty much kind of like taking information and, splitting into sub parts and kind of figuring out how to like coordinate people and, allocate resources. And all of that I think is coming very quickly to be automatable. And I think the important part will be left, which is asking the right questions.
I think you're right on the AI president, AI leaders, et cetera. I think it'll probably start with companies. You mentioned AI CEO. That makes more sense that like some company is going to probably as a gimmick launch an AI CEO, and it probably won't work very well, but an iterative process will probably ensue after where people will continue that process to where you do get an AI CEO that actually runs it far more efficient because they are decision matrix, basically a giant decision matrix for the entire company. At what point, though, does that get kind of scary? Like, imagine, AI police, AI CIA. Like, imagine like AI enabled just everything, and like there is no ability to rebel. There is no ability to like. What happens if the system, isn't good, and we want to, get rid of it?
Yeah, I think there's like few dimensions of this. I mean, there's police in lesser way, CIA in more ways have been using machine learning for over a decade now, right? Palantir is, widely known as the kind of being the machine learning backend of all of the law enforcement. And so a lot of the, like the data that is being captured by government one way or another in US is being processed. Like I remember I was at the conference in like 2014 or 2013 even, where like somebody from NSA started up and like, hey, so we're processing trillions of documents and we need to do this like clustering method faster. Like, do you have ideas how to do that? So, what are those trillion documents? So broadly speaking, like we already have some of this. It's more that decisions are made by people on top of this. And like a lot of the corruption and kind of comes from that and from the opaqueness of those decisions. I think we can configure the systems in a way where you can have kind of, in a way, inspectability, at least on the natural language side. Maybe you don't like look at neurons, but you can actually try to understand why it made such a decision, right? And there's a lot of things. I mean, we should talk about open source, kind of importance of open source in AI, etc. But there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of then inspect and understand why it made such a decision. And you still will need some Valve. Again, this is where some of the Web3 tooling come in. If this is a AI DAO, operator, it proposes to some set of actions, the community can vote to, veto it or pause it until they fully understand that it's a right sequence of actions. So we do need a system of checks and balances, similarly how we have it in the government, that, like even if it has like wrong priors or whatever, something went wrong, there's a way to kind of counterbalance it. But it's, you cannot just go and like, hey, Joe Biden, like anybody cannot just go and like, hey, Joe Biden invited you to make this decision. With AI president, you will be able to do that. You'll be just like, plug in a chat, like, hey, why is make decisions? Like, hey, actually, this is the input. This is the reasons. You're like, well, I don't believe in this. He's like, oh, here's the research that came from this, study, etc. Right? You can actually dive into a decision-making process and context that led to this. And I think like, we just cannot do that with any individual And like in general, the systems have like a principal agent problem where, as we delegate them power, they still have their own interests that are like misaligned with whoever elected them. And here you have a very direct, like, here's more training data that everybody agrees you should like update your priors, update your biases on.
So there's this potential for a dystopia, but there's also a potential for almost a utopia where it's like the whole world just gets rapidly better because we kind of remove these highly corruptible pieces of the government that often, and over time, many segments of the government do become corrupted and do a lot of bad things already. So, maybe it is a better solution. I'm curious. So we have ChatGPT for Omni coming out. It's like the voice to AI thing. It's like a little personal Jarvis. And that kind of got me thinking like, wow, what sort of industries are going to get disrupted by AI over the next, couple years? Yeah. What do you see? Like, what do you see as like the big, like, hey, these things are going, like these are just gone. And over time, these things are going to get replaced too. Like, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's like there's a study actually that kind of quantified that. But I think like it's funny because it seemed like, machine learning should pick up things that like we consider kind of manual work, right? And actually, so far, AI in robotics and kind of more like physical world have been lagging, although there's a lot more kind of research and funding is coming now. But all of the knowledge work is indeed being kind of automated, right? Like you don't need a research team anymore. You can just like ask ChatGPT, pull in the articles, find those things. You don't need potentially a lawyer or at least associate, to pull on all the like case law and, analyze it, find me the examples of what happened before and summarize it into like a compelling argument. And so what will happen, which happens in general with automation, is the people who are kind of at the top of the field, right, are still needed because they're not just they know the system, and so they know what questions to ask and where it fails, and they know how to fix it when it fails. And so it kind of like it automates that middle layer and makes it hard for juniors to join, right? It's the same thing that happened to factories, right? You went from, massive staff at a factory to there's like 3 specialists that are at a factory floor and making sure machines are working. They know how the system works, but you only need 3 now instead of 1,000. And so I think like similar level will happen across many, many like knowledge industries. And kind of front running a little bit the conversation, but we went back to the development and teaching machines to code. And we think a lot of the kind of like development and parts of the like software development process will be automated, and especially in Web3, like this is a place to make that disruption easier because of a lot of the kind of factors. And again, we can go into that later.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a teaser for some of the stuff you're up to with maybe some near AI stuff. I did want to jump into the crypto kind of side of things. So there's a lot of crypto AI projects popping up. Seems like right now, probably 99% of them are just vaporware. They're just like, hey, let's attach AI to like this useless thing and put it together. But are you seeing some things in the crypto space? They're actually like interesting use cases of like AI tied in with kind of the Web3 space.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just start with the thesis and then kind of develop it. So the thesis we announced as well is it's called user-owned AI. And so right now, kind of AI development and application, for the most part, are done within really large megacorps that already have kind of massive target audience. And in a way, they're creating a flywheel where the revenues they're generating is invested in building a better machine learning model. And that model is then kind of used to pretty much get more money out of the users, right? Because that's kind of their utility function. As a big public company, you need to post more revenue every year. And so the only way to do that is to extract more revenue. If you already have all of the users you can possibly have, you need to grow how much revenue you get from a user, which means they need to spend more time, spend more of their attention on the platform. And so that's a very negative flywheel, for the world. Because it means that these platforms are pretty much sucking in everybody's attention. and kind of, monetizing it through advertisement. And so I call it corporate-owned AI. So the opposite of this is user-owned AI. It's where the AI models are optimized for individual user success, right? For your well-being, for your economical success. So they're making sure that you and your community are kind of advancing forward, not that you're kind of almost like a product for advertisers to be sold and you're spending more time on the platform. So that is kind of the principle. Now, what needs to happen to make this principle true? Well, first of all, you cannot do this with closed source AI models, right? OpenAI by nature, being a for-profit company now, needs to generate more revenue. So they kind of have very clear incentives to, capture as much as possible. So you need an open source model. And it's important to note open source doesn't mean that parameters are open. It means that you can actually see the source, the data sets and the kind of the training code of this model. This is important because there's ways to poison data in such ways that the model will output very specific results when it's triggered for specific inputs. So you can actually, inject advertisement directly into the model. And when you publish parameters and everybody uses them, the advertisement is actually introduced at the moment when you're using it. So it's really important to know what training data went into it. It's important to understand the biases that training data has, because every single model has some biases. It's in the name, right? It's weights and biases. That's what the machine learning is. And like these biases may be true for me and maybe not true for you. So to give you an example, back when I was at Google, when you train the model, it would say Barack Obama is born in Kenya. And you're like, why is that? And well, because it, saw a bunch of Fox News, saw a bunch of, some other websites, and you kind of like, okay, well, I don't want that to happen. I wanted to say Hawaii, so I need to somehow filter that. And so, you naturally filter out Fox News. You naturally filter out that some other websites who are like to, talk about the stuff. And so you very naturally make it left-leaning in US sense, just because there was a lot of data like that. And that's not because I'm, affiliated with any political thing. It's just naturally as a developer, I would do that filtering to make sure that my evaluation set is, improving. So this is now bringing to Web3, right? So what makes sense are a lot of the components that actually form this tool chain to build open source and user-owned AI models, right? You need a training data curation. You need a way for a community to be able to curate data that goes into these models, right? Right now, this curation happens within Google's and OpenAI's and Facebook's. You need a way for potentially have more synthetic data or more acquire data pretty much from users who are willing to sell it by in nature creating also economic opportunity for those users. You need some way for pretty much training these models and acquiring, lots of compute. And that there is it's not always that you need everything decentralized, right? You don't always need a decentralized training, but you need a way to do this, to have a marketplace that's decentralized. Finally, when you do have these models, if they don't fit on a user's device, there needs to be a way to have provable, private inference. Again, this is also can use a lot of the Web3 methodology. Now, the challenge with all of this as well is that a lot of this doesn't have a business model on its own. And that's probably one of the kind of challenging parts is that a good example I like is a pure compute marketplace, right? Where you go and you just order some GPUs. It seems like a very natural Web3 application because Web3 is really good at marketplaces. But the flip side of this is that there's no differentiation, there's no network effect. And so what it means is that I, as a consumer, as a company that needs GPUs, it doesn't matter for me which marketplace I use, right? Because at the end, I'm getting relationship with that GPU on the other side. And so I'll just get whatever's the cheapest. You can even imagine an aggregator that shows you what's the cheapest one between all the marketplaces. So what happens is you're pretty much suppressing all margins for these marketplaces. The margins will keep going down until you get to whatever hardware provider is actually willing to do. And so you need a different business model if you're building such, a decentralized hardware marketplace, because you're not going to have a defensible margin business there. So that's just like some of the things where, in crypto, people kind of forget that there's like a business part. And that is, I think, is going to be important, because we in Web3 will be competing with Web2, right? There are centralized compute marketplaces which are offering all this without crypto. They, taking dollars and they offering compute, and, they kind of function exactly the same way. And for a decentralized one to be competitive, it needs to also be cheaper, right? So it needs to actually offer something that is better. And to do that, you need, the benefit is that blockchain offers extremely cheap payment processing, right? That's why they came in the first place. An example of a crowdsourcing application that we wanted to build originally has been built on Near, and there's thousands of users been working on it, right? And it has 0 employees. It has that project has 0 employees, zero operational costs. It's literally just a smart contract that, somebody can deposit money, say, I need this data labeled, and people, take the money out and pay and receive payment and label data, right? So that's a benefit. Compare this to Scale AI that needs to have, they probably have 40% just on operational payment processing, contract drafting, employments, etc. This just kind of simplifies all that. So there's huge benefits, but at the end, there still needs to be a very clear business model. And that's, when we talk about vaporware, a lot of it is because the business model is not thought out, and it's gonna be either compressed or completely disrupted by somebody else who does it in a different way, kind of in a more novel way, leveraging Web3 at the core.
Okay, to kind of summarize what you're saying, it sounds like on one part, it sounds like the powerhouse when it comes to crypto and AI really is in open source development, coordination, collaboration, and all of that. And a huge part maybe is that companies like OpenAI, Google, et cetera, they have billions of dollars in funding, where open source doesn't have any clear path to funding, and it's actually in some ways expensive. So you have things like crypto's great at raising money for anything and everything. Come up with the dumbest idea ever, and we could take that thing to multi-billions in dollar, market cap. And it feels like we're at a stage in the crypto markets where we have to kind of start pointing that fundraising mechanism at things that actually produce value. And maybe something like the crypto AI open source development space is a really great way to direct that funding, because you're funding open source AI platforms that, like you said, people can look into and see, hey, does this thing have a bias? Does this thing not have a bias? Are there ads built into this? Because as you can imagine, a big company gaining that much mind share and power, they actually have a lot of control over, in some ways, even what people think, which is kind of scary. Imagine way back in the day, Hitler had AI, right? And everyone used it to what about this? Let me ask this question. And he could inject his ideologies and thought process into that. That's a really terrifying and scary thing. So, like you said, we need some form of user-owned AI that the people can transparently and honestly look into and say, hey, this is doing good. This is doing the right thing. It's being honest. Versus corporate closed source AI. We don't know if it's being honest or not, and we don't know why it's telling us the thing it's telling us. And maybe that is the difference between a dystopia and a utopia. Is it open source or is it this closed source world? Is that a good way to kind of summarize?
Yeah, that's a very good way. And I think it's important to note, because a lot of people will be like, well, but Google will be doing will not be injecting whatever Hitler things. I actually agree with that. I don't think people, I worked at Google, right? People there are not notoriously evil in any way. It's actually a systematic bias that comes from the fact that when you launch a model, anything you do, right? When you launch in production, you do so-called A/B test. You launch, 2 options, either the old one and new one, or 2 different variants, and you check what makes more money. You naturally check which one actually generates more revenue. That's a decision to launch or not. And this is true about TikTok, it's about Instagram, every single thing. When they launch a new algorithm for, X, maybe, who knows, now their decision making is different, but when they launch a new model, ranking algorithm, generation, etc., they will naturally check what will make them more money. And that bias itself will introduce, kind of that manipulation that you talked about, that, well, obviously something that like keeps you on the page, keeps you scrolling, will naturally generate more money, right? So like the more engaging and kind of more, also polarizing it will generate more money. So that's where a lot of the social media challenges are coming from, is actually the algorithm naturally optimizes for you seeing polarizing and getting you either mad or very excited about something. And apply now this to fully generated content, which can, produce anything, right? Whatever you will prefer or whatever you get mad at. Right now you have like infinite space of kind of almost like manipulating you to spend more time. So that's where, like, again, I don't think anyone like inherently evil in any of these companies. It's just the incentive structure is so set up. And crypto here is indeed like a great way to raise money. And it's amazingly not like, it is a win-win solution, right? Because we're not trying to say like, there's like shareholders make the money and then users kind of getting screwed, right? We're saying, well, everybody's, if a user, you should probably own some of the token as well. And now you're part of it and you can decide which way it should go. So you'll have like a huge disbursement of power as well that happens. And so in turn, again, it becomes more user owned and more in control of every individual or communities that are kind of actively participating.
Okay, I think I get it. So a good example would be the media. I think everyone understands at this point, media companies, traditional media companies are struggling with revenue because of the internet, et cetera. And so they have to put out really clickbaity articles that are highly polarized as well. And that's why we have such extreme media outlets as Fox News, CNN. They're like extreme bias towards their political alignment. And this has caused a lot of maybe not in like directly false, but not true statements that come out that kind of mislead their audience toward a certain bias.
Biased views. Yeah.
And what you're saying is,
and they like reinforce the bias that people may or may not have,
yes.
right? And so like they in a way manipulating the population to think in a specific way because they have the authority, and people feel like, if they're saying this must be true, and like even it's just by avoiding some of the nuance of the situation, right? They kind of driving people into different directions.
And what you're saying is they're not necessarily doing this just because, hey, we want to trick people or whatever. They're doing it because, hey, that's how they make money. They get clicks, they get their audience riled up, and then they're gonna read more of the articles. So they have this built-in like incentive mechanism that keeps them doing this. Where when you have open source AI, and so we can have the same problem with AI, where we have the same exact issue we're having with media. But with open source AI, that kind of deals with that problem because we don't have the same incentive mechanisms that a centralized company would have. And that's what you're viewing as like a really killer application of crypto is, hey, we can really make something that inherently doesn't have these biases built in, where the other systems will inherently gravitate towards a more biased approach.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So what's near AI? You've kind of skirted around it. How does near AI tie into all this?
Yeah. So near obviously is like, it's like an ecosystem that kind of builds towards this broader vision of user ownership. And within near, we already have a number of AI projects that are building on top of near, right? We had some more from before. We actually have a lot more coming now. But so my co-founder actually had a quick stint at OpenAI, and then in 2022, and then started a AI company to build foundational models in 23. And kind of as we were talking about some of this, because he started a new startup and he kind of fall into all the same problems, right? He's like, hey, you need a lot more resources to build something at reasonable scale. And to do that, you need a bunch of investors, and then investors will require you to generate profit. And so you kind of fall, like as a Web2 startup, you fall into the same problem. And so that's where we kind of brought it in back as a near AI. And it's focused on few things, obviously kind of more advanced research on reasoning and kind of, being able to do more sophisticated tasks. But specifically, we brought back what near AI was doing originally, which was teaching machines to code. And so for simplicity, the experience we're going after is you go in, you type in the idea you want to build. Let's say you want a decentralized, freelancer marketplace, or you want a, decentralized video content platform that doesn't, kick off creators from its platform. And it actually starts by writing out how would that platform work, right? In natural language in English. And you can correct it, ask you questions. It's like, hey, should it have this, do you want to pay with token or with stable coins? And you can kind of like really reason through this and kind of work with it almost like as a partner to figure out how you want that platform to be built. And then the developer part kicks in and tries to build it. It writes smart contracts, it writes front end, it does, middleware and other stuff. And you have a fully built application that you can, play with, interact with. So we have like a very basic prototype of this. It's obviously not, completely working yet. And, you still need a developer right now to actually like finish it up and polish it to actually work. But why it's important is because in Web3 right now, there's very little application developers, right? We have probably like 100,000 different infrastructure projects, 50,000 different layer twos, but we have like a dozen applications, 4 of which are on Near. And so the reality is like most people are just like not like who come to crypto not building applications for various reasons, funding, hard to acquire users, easy to launch a token for infrastructure, all of those reasons, right? But more importantly, even with those, with all of the infrastructure projects, the total number of developers, at least based on Electric Report, is 7,000 full-time developers. This is less than one Google product. Like Google for Work or, has more developers than all of Web3 right now. So if we want a competitive, polished product that everybody loves to use, you really need to really automate a lot of the work right now that is happening. And so, but again, from a more longer term perspective, this is a path forward for a few reasons. One is this is a really good environment to test reasoning for models, right? To write code, to be able to reason about the problems and kind of how to solve, especially like more complicated, like, hey, I want to build an order book, DEX, right? All that requires a lot more sophisticated reasoning. And code is really good at like testing that it's correct. Like we have, a lot more instrumentation on making sure versus like, if it writes a physics essay, it's really hard to understand if it's correct or not, unless you're a physicist as well. So we have like a lot more automated machinery. Another important part is, and this is kind of the, potential dystopia problem, is that the language models now are getting better at finding vulnerabilities in the code. They're actually way better at doing that than writing code themselves. And I'm working on a blog post on this because I took a vulnerability from 2 weeks ago and I ran the code before the fix through ChatGPT. And, after a couple prompts, it's like, yeah, here's the problem, like this case is not handled properly. And it's exactly what was the vulnerability. Right. So the reality is like already now, if you've prompted in the right way and you have like somebody to analyze the output, you can actually find vulnerabilities potentially at scale in the systems that we use in day to day. And that's a very scary situation. And like this is just going to get worse because people always write code with bugs, right? There's like 15 bugs per 1,000 lines of code. And, there's millions of code lines in operating systems, networking stacks, browsers, whatever we're using right now to record. So the only kind of real solution for this is not just AI written code, but AI written code that's formally verified. That there's a mathematical proof that this code is exactly satisfying all of the specific conditions that were specified. And so this is something that like in Web3, we have been actually researching, as an industry, the formal verification for smart contracts, because smart contracts are extremely valuable code that we want to be absolutely correct. And so this is actually a very good match as well to, develop these techniques to have a formally verified AI developer that writes formally verified code, because we will need to rewrite all of the internet. Like this is inevitability of kind of our future, is that we'll really need to rewrite everything. And so the only way to do that is kind of by developing this methodology. And so that's also part of what we're working on.
So you mentioned dystopia, but it also sounds like utopia because projects can audit their code with this before they launch it, and so that should be able to find the vulnerabilities. And like you said, it does make a lot more sense that AI would write perfect code versus humans who we make mistakes all the time. That's we're not great at computational tasks in the same way that a computer would be, and code writing seems like a natural fit for AI versus humans, and humans are more the creative process behind that code writing. So to kind of summarize, you guys are building tools to write and develop applications, etc., using AI versus developers, which sounds like that is absolutely the future, but also building tools to make code more secure using AI as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned a stat, which was only 7,000 developers in Web3 versus one Google product. I've never heard that before. Why do you think that is? Because that's pretty shocking to me, especially with how easy it is to make money in crypto. You'd think the incentives would be there for a lot more devs to be trying a lot more things.
Well, it's actually, it's easy to make money even without writing any code. You can just fork existing code, right, and launch it. So, the number of Uniswap forks that pretty much were literally the same code as there's thousands of them. Similar right now is layer 2. You can go and launch layer 2 yourself, right? You don't need to write any code right now. So, and if layer 2s are raising money, boom, you can go raise your own creator layer 2 on top of this. But I think the challenge being, twofold. One is we actually, the idea is that you don't need as many developers in general, because where in traditional Web 2, when you're building something, you cannot actually rely on external companies and providers a lot. You need to rebuild everything from scratch because that providers may disappear, run out of business, get acquired by a competitor or whatever, right? So you cannot actually even use a lot of APIs, especially when you're a bigger company. Versus in Web3, we have guarantees, right? The smart contract will not disappear. Uniswap will be there. Even if they launch a new version, the old version is still there. So you can rely on it, even though original Uniswap was built by 2 hackers in the, in the loft. And so and it processed, billions of dollars. You cannot imagine that happening in Web 2. So I think part of it is also we actually don't need that as many developers generally. But the other challenge has been bringing developers been hard. And there is a lot of developers who are hey, I don't see, everybody's building infrastructure. I don't see any use cases. I can go and, build an AI. I can go build somewhere else. And people do want to see their stuff being used. And so I think that's kind of a combination of these factors been true that we haven't seen as many developers coming in.
So maybe a good way to put it would be there's natural incentive mechanisms in that because Ethereum's been so successful, because Uniswap's been so successful, people just simply try to be the next Ethereum, the next Uniswap, the next layer 2, etc., which leads to a lot of overbuilding of infrastructure. And like you mentioned, it's easier to fork code and do these things than it is to write code from scratch. You write code from scratch, there's a lot of inherent risks that come with that. If you mess up, you can get hacked. You could go to jail if you get hacked because maybe North Korea hacks you or something. The SEC could come after you for any number of reasons. So the incentive structure really does push people to do these same safe things. Don't try anything new. Otherwise, you might get severely punished.
Yeah, I think also, the regulatory uncertainty is definitely been a big detractor as well for a bunch of people.
All right. Well, so that's near AI. You guys are still doing all the old stuff though, right? And when I say old stuff, it is your new stuff too. It's modularity. You guys are doing some data availability. You guys have a lot going on at Near. I think it's one of the most underappreciated chains for the amount of users and actual use cases. Like you mentioned, some of the biggest apps with the most users are actually, weirdly enough, built on Near, and nobody talks about it at all.
Well, it's not weird. It's it's the only blockchain that can actually scale. We actually had this example where it was the same time Solana had a lot of usage, Base had a lot of usage, and Near had a massive growth spur. And so Solana, fees went up, Base fees went up, Near added 2 more shards, fees stayed the same. So we kind of proved out the whole point of Near that hey, we can actually add more capacity to the network over time and really continue maintaining low fees for everyone, even as some applications are growing, right? We have Hot that has like 2 million daily actives, Kaiching that has like 1.5 million daily actives. So like overall, we like normally across, Near, Kaiching, Sweatcoin, and like another like few other apps that have massive user bases are like at over 2 million on-chain daily actives, which is, on many days like higher than everybody else in Web3. And it's because, we can actually continue scaling. And we actually have a major upgrade coming in about a month and a half, which introduces stateless validation to the protocol itself. And so this would allow us to continue scaling the blockchain itself, reduce the requirements from validator nodes themselves, and actually add more security to the network. And so kind of that's also very exciting because it's kind of the completion of that original roadmap we outlined in 2019 of the blockchain. I mean, there's still obviously a lot of work on the protocol side, and that team is, kind of really set out to continue pushing the envelope there. And so what happens actually, the Near ecosystem is decentralized. We have a lot of different teams that are working as different companies on different efforts, but they're building toward like kind of one unified vision. And so, as you mentioned, DA, actually on June 13th, we announced the spinning off of Near DA and Fast Finality Layer as a separate company called Nafa Labs, really focused on this like near modularity, providing near products kind of in services to the layer 2 and kind of broader Ethereum and Web3 ecosystem. And just again, this is a good example of all of the things that are happening, right? There's a lot of different things that are useful for different folks at different layers. And we want, to continue offering it and decentralize while we're doing it as well, kind of creating more projects that are successful in driving this broader user-owned internet vision.
You mentioned, and I've mentioned, that crypto needs killer apps. What are these apps on Near that have so many users?
Yeah, so there's a Kaiching, which is pre-installed on phones, on Android phones with Oppo and Xiaomi manufacturer. And it offers kind of a number of experiences. In a way, it's like a super app type platform. And this is not crypto project. They existed before. They've been around for like 7 years. That's why they have massive user base and massive install base. And they actually are on the lock screen. So when you pick up your phone, they control the lock screen. They show you like nice, kind of lock image. And then you can click from there to go to their news portal, to their games, to their e-commerce, and some other stuff. And so they're kind of like this, super app platform where you can start your journey. And so whereas they use crypto, is actually they switched from Stripe. So they were doing e-commerce, they were using Stripe, and Stripe has minimum fee of 30 cents per any transaction. And so switch to Near, which is a fraction of a cent, and they also stake, and so they can cover some of that as well. And so for them, it's like massive over 100x reduction in fees they pay from Web 2 to Web 3. And you can even use Kaiching in Singapore, for example, in the stores. I bought a coffee in the Singapore and MBS hotel. So that's kind of like a massive platform. It's in developing market. They started in Southeast Asia and Singapore. They just expanded in Europe. They're not planning to actually launch in US, and that's why in US nobody knows about them. They're planning to launch in Brazil and some other places because it's a developing market, Android-focused application. So the other one is Hot. So Hot has actually started as just a wallet. They were a wallet inside Telegram. So like I can literally send, like people can send each other a link. And if you click on it, you end up, you get the account created and you end up in a wallet directly in Telegram. You don't need to install anything. You don't need to figure out seed phrases. You don't need to deal with any of that. And your account is literally a Telegram account.tg. So this is a proper Near account on chain. And there, they had a game to kind of get engagement going, but now it's a full also app store. They have applications, they have NFT trading, they have token launches and Launchpad, they have some games. But what they just launched is actually this chain abstraction story that we've been telling as well, and we haven't touched on that. But now through that wallet, which is, starts as kind of Near wallet, but also the users don't even know it's Near because it's like you just launch, you get .tg and you use stuff. You actually can interact with Base now. So they launched integration through our chain signatures kind of tech to for users to transact on Base. They already onboarded 300K users from their 9 million to Base, and their apps are number 3 and number 4 by daily active users on Base now. So, and this is actually somewhere where we were going with a lot of our tech is how do we make it invisible for the users that they're using blockchain, right? And that's why we have a lot of users, they just don't always know they're using Near. And it was kind of by design. And so what we also added is ability to now transact to other chains as well, starting from a Near account and Near smart contract. And so that's kind of opens up a whole new paradigm of both how you build end user applications as well as how you build smart contracts, which are multi-chain natively. But globally, we think this is actually going to be one of the biggest unlocks for truly building applications in Web3, because now you don't need to think like, oh, which chain am I going to launch on? Am I only accessing users from one chain and then I lack all the other chain, or I need to build every chain integrations? It's very expensive and very complicated. So all of that kind of worrying and complexity is removed from you, and we just give you, a set of simple APIs to build on top.
That is so cool, and makes me kind of sad that that's not talked about more. It feels like sometimes, especially in crypto and the crypto influencer circles or maybe podcast circles, it's like the same kind of things that are talked about, and you miss a huge portion of the picture because there's so much more going on and so many cool things going on, and they just don't have, for some reason, the same mind share. And I don't really know why that is. Maybe it is because you guys have made it invisible.
I mean, honestly, it was very weird. So when Hot launched, they launched in February, and in the first 10 days, they got to 1 million users. So for comparison, ChatGPT got to 1 million users in 7 days. And, Instagram got in 3 months or something. So it's probably one of the fastest growing applications ever, right? I mean, now there's more folks launching really successful use cases in Telegram as well, but this was one of the first. And so, nobody wanted to write about it. It was actually very strange because we're shared with reporters and they're like, but what's a narrative? I'm like, who cares about narrative? This is usage. This is real use case. And obviously they offer, Hot Inside offers free transactions for stable coins, for example. They partnered with some exchanges for 0 fee onboarding. So it's actually becomes as well as payments gateway and pay like a Waymo for outside of US as well. So it has all of that use cases there. It's just not the narrative, right? So, if it was Hot AI, then everybody would be very excited. But yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge is token launches, people write about it, fundraisers, people write about it. As soon as you go to hey, this is actual usage, people meh.
When we should be writing about it and talking about it, because if you want more people to build apps, you should be making and promoting the successful use cases in the space. I think maybe some of it comes down to, I'm not familiar, but I would guess maybe those don't have tokens attached to them, and those tokens haven't done well. Because it feels like when a token goes up in price, that is the coolest tech ever.
Yeah, I mean that's true as well. Yeah, if it's not pre-token launch or whatever, then nobody cares. And then if post-token launch it doesn't do well, nobody cares either. Even if it's hey, it's actually being used and develop actually a use case that people should care about. So yeah, I mean that's part of the I would say the flip side of this speculative nature of crypto that the benefit is you can kind of do capital formation easier.
Yeah. It's token is a surprisingly powerful marketing mechanism. I think that a lot of people undervalue for that purpose, but also again, like you said, there's two sides to that. It can token go down to, and without a token, maybe you build a better application, but you miss out on some of those marketing benefits. Anyway, that's amazing. Last question I want to ask you is just, where do you see maybe Near AI, what you guys are building in the next 5 years? Like, what do you see that becoming, or what do you hope it becomes 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think kind of on a broader near side, right? We outlined this user-owned AI vision. And so again, we have like a number of projects that are actually working together to build toward that. Everything from decentralized inference, data, like agentic frameworks, and other kind of both tooling as well as some applications already coming. And I think there, like, I want to see that kind of functionality built out and integrated with this end user applications and wallets, right? And actually, we're starting already to see some of this happening. Like Minbase already has AI navigation. Like you can, say, hey, what is the latest tokens that I traded, or, swap me this token for that token. And you can imagine it's like, hey, build me a portfolio of all this and that, right? So like they already have that kind of functionality integrated into the end wallet. And so I want to see that expanding into like proper, usage where we can actually start measurably see success of the users, right? So for example, the net worth of the users increasing, right? The time, the satisfaction of his life, etc. There's like few different metrics I outlined actually in one of the tweets. Now on Near AI side, kind of feeding into that is we want to, honestly, like, I'm a little bit, obviously, as any crypto founder probably will have to like, hey, everything will be done tomorrow, mainnet tomorrow kind of thing. But I'm really excited to see, first like 100 apps built using this platform. But beyond that, the way we're building it, it's a little bit more generic than just building applications, right? So it can do actions for you. It can actually, it can write code to execute something on your behalf. It can, navigate browser and do actions as well there. So you can imagine like it's a fully automated platform, again, that becomes your kind of, back office, your, offload your work, etc. And it uses all those agentic systems, right? Where you can say like, hey, go research for me this topic, figure out how this is to be done, maybe pay my bills, launch a couple applications, and then, come back to me when you're done it. So it's like becoming more and more of that platform. And obviously, for that, we need to make some progress on kind of models with reasoning and with ability to like operate in that more formal space as well. But yeah, I'm really excited what we can build here.
So maybe to summarize, the killer outcome for something like Near AI would be that it's making building crypto applications significantly easier. And when it's significantly easier, you're going to get more builders coming and more building happening. And the code should be better than what a human could write. And with more building, you get more innovation, more attempts. And with more attempts, more innovation. And with more innovation, you get better applications that people actually want to use. And that's like the effects that kind of lead to this ultimate outcome of like furthering crypto adoption and the entire Web3 space.
Yeah, and benefiting individuals and communities.
Yes. All right. Well, it was great having you on here. It's great hearing from you about Near and hearing it directly from you. Just to give some disclosure, I don't currently hold any Near, but I will after this episode because you sold me on it. But that's not investment advice for anyone. That's not me saying you should buy it. None of this is saying that you should buy any sort of crypto or anything like that. Obviously, as an adult, you should make your own decisions and figure that out for yourself. Really, what's good for you isn't necessarily always the same as what's going to be good for me. So this has been great having you on, and thanks. Yeah.